welcome everybody. Thanks very much for coming along to this event today. I think this is quite an interesting story and one that we've been looking at across a number of sectors. So I wasn't particularly surprised to see that when we looked at how different age groups are engaging with retail mail in three key sectors that we've looked at today, we've realised that making a physical impact in a digital world is just as appropriate for younger audiences. And in fact, if anything, it's driving even more behaviour from them. And I'll come on to that as we go. Next slide, please, Carmen. So firstly, I just wanted to start with a fairly bold statement of engagement. So within the mail order sort of online retail sector, and we split this through the Joint Industry Committee for Mail Data. We have supermarket data separately and we have high street retailer separately. So it allows us to get pretty granular about the detail, but engagement rates are incredibly high. And engagement is really, whether you've read it, opened it, put it aside to look at later, there's a lot of different ways that we measure that engagement. But it's an incredibly strong metric at 94% of all mail from mail order and online retailers is engaged with. Next slide, please, Carmen. And so just to recap on Gikmel Data, this was a huge project that started back in 2017. And the idea behind it was to provide similar gold standard data that all of the other big channels could provide. So allowing us to look at reach and frequency data. And there's now actually over 195,000 individual mail journeys captured within that database. So it's a very significant and robust set of data. And within retail, there's over 45,000 examples. So again, it's a significant set of data looking at all of the individual journeys of the mail packs through the home and collating that up so that we can look at the data in the round. The great thing, and this is something that is quite exclusive to Gikmel, is that the analytics are actually available at these granular sector levels, but also at individual brand levels. So if there's enough data within the database, you can go and look at your own brand and see how you're performing against a range of competitors. Next slide, please, Carmen. So what we've done for this particular study, we've looked at three of the, probably some of the meatiest sectors within mail order and online retail. Now, I appreciate that quite a few of these brands that you can see are probably now moved to more of a digital offer, but a lot of them still use mail to actually then drive traffic to the website to browse the full range. But you've got notable exceptions in there. Obviously Bowden is a big cataloguer. Next obviously don't do their catalogue anymore, but they still send mail to drive traffic. Studio probably do a cut down version or a mail pack. And so there's a lot of differences within how each of these brands are tackling it, but we've looked at them together so that we can understand what the collective behaviour is. And we thought these sectors were quite interesting ones because fashion, of course, everyone engages with that. I wasn't sure where we'd come out on the homewares kind of side, but again, it looks like it's very, the engagement is quite evenly spread across the age groups. And there's some interesting findings on the gardening side. Whilst there's been a massive surge in interest during lockdown within gardening, there's some quite interesting differences there. So next slide, please. So which age groups get retail mail? Well, I don't think you'll be terribly surprised to hear that sort of within fashion, it's only 9% of that younger age cohort there, the 17 to 34-year-olds. But it's huge with 35 to 54-year-olds. 58% of them are made up of those people who are receiving mail from retailers. And then the smaller group is actually the older age group of 55 plus. Move over to the sort of gardening side. Again, I was a little surprised at this. I thought this would be much more skewed towards the older age group of 55 plus. But actually, more people in that middle age cohort, the 35 to 54-year-olds, are actually receiving mail from gardening catalogue brands. Now, you'll just see there's a tiny little note on the gardening front. The 6% of 17 to 34-year-olds who get gardening catalogues was actually just too small a sample to look at, so we haven't been able to look at it here. And that's one of the, one of the interesting differences between these three sectors. That actually that's where they are very underrepresented young people. Next slide, please, Carmen. So what I'm saying here is, Gen Z is actually a really big fan of mail. They don't get very much of it, but they actually prefer to combine physical and digital channels together, and they really take notice of mail. 45% of 15 to 24-year-olds are more likely to trust mail than any other age group. And that's a really strong result that we keep finding across various pieces of research that we do. And in the last 12 months, 42% of 15 to 44-year-olds have searched for more information after receiving mail. Now, I'm going to come on to some more granular detail about that, but those are the real headlines. I think, we've called it phygital here, which I think is a really nice way of describing the physical and the digital working together in the world of Gen Z. And it's a really interesting finding. Next slide, please, Carmen. So I know this is quite busy and there's quite a lot going on this slide. So let me just explain what's happening here. So what Gikmel Data allows us to do is actually track people's behaviour with mail over a 28-day period. So in fact, you can see here that actually what's happening is that within fashion and homewares, the mail that stays longest in the home is with the 17 to 34-year-olds. And again, what we see quite frequently, and it doesn't matter which sector you look at, it can be financial services, it can be grocery, you see that the 55 pluses are a bit more decisive with their mail. They sift through it and they sort it much quicker, and they, put it into the recycling if they're not going to save it. But interestingly, 50% of all mail in this mail order and retail sector is still actually in the home after 28 days. So this is when it's active in the home, but a lot of it will stay there for a very long time, and may actually be returned to at a later date. Our survey, however, only goes up for 28 days. Next slide, please, Carmen. And then what also you can see from this slide is, this is what is describing the reach of retail and mail order mail. And actually, again, you can see that this is slightly higher for fashion for the 17 to 34-year-olds. And just to explain what reach means in that example, so 1.24 means here that for every 100 pieces of mail that are sent around about fashion, another 24 people are seeing that piece of mail. So it's extending the reach of that mail, and you're getting to a bigger audience than perhaps you might have imagined. And Gikmel Data allows you to obviously look at that. When we look at the 35 to 54-year-olds, you can see there that, for every 100 pieces of mail sent to that age group, another 12 people will see that piece of mail, and so on and so forth. So actually, you can see that it's pretty consistent across the age groups, that they're sharing it with other people, and they're showing it to other people in the household. Next slide, please. And what this data is showing is that mail frequently in our world is counted as a one. It lands on the doorstep, and that's pretty much all that happens with it. And what you can see from this data is this is the number of times that people go back and revisit it. And what we're looking at here is simply the physical interactions that someone has with mail. So those are things like opening, reading, putting aside to look at later, passing it on to the person that it's for, and those kinds of physical sorting of pieces of mail. And again, you can see here what we find very consistently is that the 55 plus year olds, they seem to do much more of those sorting things than the other age groups. Apart from in the gardening catalogue sort of area, you've got 35 to 54-year-olds who interact with pieces of mail from gardening companies 4.7 times. And you can see that the 17 to 34-year-olds, they don't seem to interact quite so much in the physical sense. But we'll come on to sort of explore that a little bit further to understand just what's happening there. So next slide, please, Carmen. And this is where it does get really, really interesting from my point of view, because I think everyone assumes that young people literally live their lives just in the digital space. They're using their mobile phone to do everything, and they're not actually interacting with print. Now, what this is showing us that the 17 to 34-year-olds who are getting mail from fashion retailers, homeware retailers, and well, they don't get the gardening ones. They are interacting commercially at a much higher rate. Now, what do I mean by commercially? This is where, again, Gikmel Data actually does something that's a little bit unique. When someone gets their mail, what they do is track it through the home. And we not only ask what they do with it physically, but we ask what they do with it as a result commercially. And these are things like going to the sender's website, going online for more information, discussing it with somebody, phoning the sender, all of those kind of, or even visiting the sender's store. That's another category that we pick up. You can see that the 17 to 34-year-olds are incredibly active. 51% of them interacting with fashion retail communications, 56% of them interacting with homeware communications. And that's actually, much, much higher than those two other age groups that you can see below. I wonder what's happening with the 35 to 54-year-olds. There does appear to be a bit of a spike with the gardening catalogues. And just to give you a sense of how that benchmarks against the rest of all of the sectors that are contained within the Gikmel database, the average commercial actions taken across all different types of sectors is 33%. So you can see that actually most of these categories are benchmarking incredibly well against, the other sectors that we measure. Next slide, please. And what does this mean in real terms? So this is really explaining what's happening within those commercial actions. And what you have to remember is that of the 50% of young people that are interacting, we're now looking at that 50%, and this is a subset of that data. So what that means in real terms is that you can see that there's a lot of buying behaviour going on. So 33% of 17 to 34-year-olds are going on to do some sort of buying behaviour in the fashion sector. 43% of that 35 to 54-year-olds are going on to do some sort of buying behaviour. And then the 55 pluses, 50% of them are going on to make some sort of buying behaviour. So what they're declaring within the Gikmel data is that the mail they're getting from fashion retailers is causing them to go on and make some form of purchase. Vouchers, as we know, can be a really, really strong driver of getting that response. And you can see again that, you've got 21%, 16% and 20% of those individual age groups actually going on to use a voucher. And then it gets, again, we capture planning a large purchase, would you believe? So again, we go into an awful lot of detail. And there's definite activity there with perhaps a sweet spot for that 35 to 54-year-olds in the fashion category. Now you can see the behaviour on the right-hand side there on the homewares is slightly different. But I was very taken by the figure on the third set of data along, which is planning a large purchase. And you can see there that in the homeware area, 33% of 17 to 34-year-olds are saying that they're going on to plan a large purchase. And that seems really, really high. And again, I think it's really interesting to show that the younger people are actually engaging at those kinds of levels. Next slide, please. When you start to look, though, at the online behaviour, it does seem to be a bit more nuanced. And I'd love to understand a bit more, and if any of the brands in that study actually want to do a bit more work on this, I'd love to do that. Because what you can see is that in the fashion area, what you're seeing is a direct link to the sender's website. So those bars on the left in fashion are basically where they directly say they, as a result, are going online to the sender's website. The next bars along are actually any other online behaviour. So that could be using a tablet or a smartphone, searching the web generally. So, we know that, sometimes people will shop around for other offers or similar products. But with homeware, again, that's slightly different. And you can see that young people are very much not shopping around. They're very much being directed to the visitors to visit the sender's website. So 59% of them are making a direct link between that piece of mail that they've received from a homeware retailer and going to visit their website. Very few of them are taking other digital actions, just 14%. And I think that's a really interesting finding. Obviously, the contrast between fashion, which tends to be less of a high ticket, price item, the homewares is sort of side of things is bound to be a much more considered purchase. And I think therefore it's quite interesting what this data is telling us. Next slide, please, Carmen. And then the one other thing that we capture within commercial action is discussion, because ultimately a discussion is, is actually also an amplification of your brand message. So what you see here is that people within these age groups, they're all displaying really quite high levels of discussion. So that means they've talked to, sometimes they talk more than once to people, and that's within the data. We do capture that. So that you can see, over 40% of those 17 to 34-year-olds are discussing retail fashion, and then even higher, 63% are having a discussion around homeware retail communications. Next slide. And I think one of the other things that can really help to drive that commercial interaction is personalization. And I know a lot of catalogue retailers do this brilliantly. I get stuff from catalogue retailers, and I just think they've done a fantastic job of really drawing me in, using my name to the right effect, but also making sure that the products that are in that catalogue are relevant to me and are relevant to what I might have previously purchased. And what we find, again, within the Gikmel data is that when the mail is actually personalised, it drives up the average frequency. So the average frequency across all mail is 4.3, but when it's personalised, it achieves a higher rate of frequency. And that's really interesting to see. I've already mentioned, I think, in a previous slide, that actually the average number of commercial actions is 33%. And you can see from the data that I shared before that actually all those three retail sectors are doing much better in terms of those commercial interactions. And one thing, again, that you can look at in quite a lot of detail within Gikmel is what the content type of each mailing piece is. So we can even dig deeper and look at, whether the retail piece that was sent actually contains a voucher. And when people actually do include a voucher, 51% of mail containing one or a coupon drives commercial action. So you can see that starts to even uplift on that kind of the commercial actions that you see on average. And I think the way that brands across these sectors often use coupons is to make sure that, again, they're personalized to what my previous spend level was, and what they think they might be able to push me up to, so that you can make improvements and gains in that space. Next slide. And then again, I think this is where we really get to sort of have some exciting stuff in our sector at the moment. There's some huge leaps and bounds within technology. I think we've seen during COVID that the QR code has become somewhat ubiquitous, hasn't it? I think we've all used them, we've all connected with them, and they're just so easy now because you don't have to download anything, you just point your smartphone at them. There's some other new and interesting developments that I think will be and are already being used within retail. So you can see the first visual on the left-hand side. That's actually a furniture retailer it's an Australian one. But what they've done is they've pointed me to their website from a printed piece of material, and I've gone online, and that's actually I've managed to place that chair that's in front of my bookcase actually in the room that I'm sitting in at the moment. um, and it's brilliant because you can actually visualize what the furniture is actually going to look like in the space that you've got. And I think that's where Gen Z, if you give them the opportunity to connect the offline world as seamlessly as you can, with no friction, they will engage with that at levels that I think we might be quite surprised at. Net-a-Porter have been doing this kind of thing for quite some time, and using their app, you can actually look at any product importer magazine to take you seamlessly to purchase. So if I'm browsing through that, I can just point, once I've got the app, I can actually just point the app at the product and it will take me straight to the page. And finally, on the right-hand side, this is an example that a company I've been talking to have done with Heat magazine. And obviously Heat magazine is quite a sort of fashion-led publication. And what they've done is they've made their content shoppable. So with this particular technology, you do have to download a QR code, but then it just takes you straight to the link. And once you've done that, you point your camera over any product on the page and it will take you to the purchase. And you can see that the little image on the right has taken me to the dress that's on the page in the middle little visual that you can see. And I think with technology like that, we're seeing that there's this real opportunity to drive offline to online. It also, of course, means that the whole of your response rates that you can see from the Gikmel data, we might not be capturing from our usual methods of data capture and response. This gives you a much more accurate picture of who has actually connected with the brand in the digital space. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to just kind of, this is a kind of summary of what we've looked at, and then I've got one final piece that I do want to plug. Engagement rates are incredibly high. I think, looking at 94% of engagement, I'm not sure how many other channels could actually claim that level of engagement. And it doesn't matter whatever you're sending, across all of those categories that we've looked at. It does seem to be incredibly strong, in retail, for fashion, for homewares, and for gardening. And I think there's potentially a bit of a sweet spot though with the 35 to 54-year-olds, and that's because probably they have got a slightly higher disposable income. It's great that you're engaging perhaps the future audience, and the Gen Z and Millennials are really sort of engaging with print. But I think, let's not forget there are there are other considerations in terms of, profitability. I think the brand discussion, think about how that could be used. I think that's a really interesting one if you actually include pieces that would give the recipients of the mail that you're sending a talking point. You might even be able to use that as an opportunity to cross-sell to somebody else in the household. I think the role of personalization is incredibly strong, and I think it's one of those things that you can now do pretty well in all of the digital print that we have available to us. I certainly know when I used to do IKEA, we used to really tailor the mail that we sent, to individual segments. So we knew that in January, empty nesters were mainly buying soft furnishings and throws. And so the mailing piece that we put together would ensure that we covered a really good range of that kind of homeware that they were buying into. And then, of course, we made all of the incentives absolutely tailored to get them to spend in that area. And finally, that frictionless offline to online experience. it's now, the entry level for some of those technologies is way much cheaper than you might think. So I think all of those things, are really worth looking at again. Certainly on the Heat magazine one, that's a new technology company who are offering a really, really strong entry level at a very good price. So I think it's something that brands really ought to be considering at the moment. And then I've just got one final slide because I want to make a little plug for something that Marketreach has been working on, and it launched last week at F Week, if you're familiar with the event. Walk is basically the biggest database of the best performing case studies in the UK. And really what they collect, they only do their awards every 2 years. But when they do their awards, they are only looking at those brands who've got an entry where it's really shifted the brand. They're looking for the best marketing performance. So all of the case studies that they have on their database are some of the best in the UK for marketing effectiveness. And we've just co-written the report that you can see here with them. And basically, we've run 2 webinars, one last week and one this week. And you can go and download the full paper if you want to have a read. But just to give you some of the highlights, basically campaigns are 43% more likely to report revenue uplifts when mail is in the mix. 75% more likely to report profit increases. 68% report increases in market share, and 52% report increases in ROI when mail is included in the mix. It's some really stunning findings for how mail, when it's integrated with other channels, because that's where it works the best. It doesn't work so well as a standalone channel. I think if you fancy a good read, I would recommend it.